Welcome everyone to my latest Pillars of Eternity min-max character creation guide. Hello, my name is Macsen. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the Priest class. Now, Priests are in the same basic class group as Paladins and Chanters. They're a support or leader type of class, but they actually play much more like the Wizard and Druid classes because they're a spellcaster. By the time you get your Priest all the way up to level 11, they have a huge variety of pure rare spells that you can choose to cast from in every engagement you get yourself in. In fact, later on, at the very high levels, some of those pure rare spells become pure encounter abilities. You can see that that's mentioned here. I believe at level 9, your level 1 spells become pure encounter use, and at level 11, your second level spells become pure encounter use. Now, you've actually got 6 levels of spells in total. You get access to a new level of spell every couple of levels. The late level spells are better than the earlier level spells to do more damage, for example, or have higher buff amounts to certain abilities. But that doesn't mean that the early level spells aren't useful. They're pretty great, in fact. The way the Priest works is they mainly provide area of effect buffs to other party members, and also they are probably the best healers within the game as well, especially since the Chanter's healing ability got nerfed quite a bit recently. But they are capable of actually doing quite a bit of damage too. Most of their damage spells mainly affect a single target, but later on so they do get some area of effect spells as well for the high levels. Now, I would quite recommend the Priest actually as a player character. The reason why I say that is because they have a reputation ability. The Paladin also has a very similar ability too. So what happens is when you're selecting your Priest, you have to make a deity pick. Now, the reputation ability only works if you actually select the Priest as your player character. So when you gain reputations in the game via dialogue, you can see here that the Priest has certain favored dispositions and disfavored dispositions. In the case of the Skaen or Skaen deity, those are deceptive and cruel for favored dispositions, and disfavored are benevolent and aggressive. Now, as you gain reputation points, I believe the maximum is 3, it might be 4, probably 3. Basically, this enhances your Holy Radiance per encounter ability. So what happens is you do extra burn damage to enemies, just vessels to start out, but there is a talent to basically burn anyone, and also it heals your allies further as well. You get an extra boost to that if your reputation matches your favored disposition. Downside is if you get a disfavored disposition, it actually damages this ability, so that's something you definitely want to avoid. Now, the Priest deities, beyond this ability here with the dispositions, there is actually a talent that you can get later on for each of these deities, dependent on which one you pick. Now, this talent basically diversifies your build in some way. So basically, Brath, if you were to pick Brath's talent, you would get a weapon focus for a certain couple of weapons, that being a mace and a greatsword, and all of these are very similar. They also get quite a large accuracy boost to a certain couple of weapons. Eothas is Flail and Morningstar, Magran is Sword and Arquebus, Skaen is Stiletto and Club, and Whale is Quarterstaff and Rod. Now, sadly, each of these don't actually match any of the weapon focuses. They're in different types of groups. The only exception to that is Skaen, which is Club and Stiletto are both within the weapon focus for Ruffian that you can pick later on. There's also a free spell that you get depending on which deity talent you pick as well. If you pick it, you don't have to. So what that is basically it gives you a lesser version of a spell that is normally only open to a wizard or via scrolls. So Brath is Concelhaut's Corrosive Siphon, a lesser version of that, a not so good version. Eothas gets a heal spell that lowers fright and terror within your party members. I'm not sure if that's a wizard spell or just unique to Eothas. Magran is Burst of Summer Flames, a lesser version of that. Whale is a lesser version of Alchemy, as Dazzling Lights. But Skaen is different, and this is the reason why I'm doing a Skaen build for this video. Skaen actually gets a lesser version of the Rogue's sneak attack ability. So the Rogue's sneak attack ability is basically a huge damage boost against afflicted opponents. It's only certain types of affliction now. There's 9 different types of affliction that qualify. That being the petrified to prone group, which is petrified, paralyzed, stuck, stunned, and prone. And there's 4 others, which are weakened, hobbled, flanked, and blinded, if my memory is correct. So if you attack any of those afflicted status with the sneak attack ability, basically you do extra damage. Now the rogues normally would be 1.5 times damage, but the lesser version for Skaen is 1.2 times damage. But that's still a significant amount, and I think it's a really good pick, picking Skaen as your priest deity. That's what I'm doing here, and that's why I've done that here. The weapons aren't really so great, club and stiletto, but that sneak attack ability works no matter what weapons you use, even if you use a spell as well. As long as you attack within the first couple of seconds of combat, or you attack someone that is inflicted by one of those afflictions, 1 or more. Now before I get into details on attributes, let's show off the more basic priest stats. So you can see here the priest's endurance, health, accuracy and deflection is extremely low. In fact, it's the second worst starting stats in the game after the wizard. But unlike the wizard, the priest doesn't really have any personal buff spells, so they can't really enhance their deflection in many ways or make them less resistant to attacks. So the priest, if it does get engaged or attacked, then it goes down very quickly. So that's something you really need to try and avoid. So because of that, they make pretty poor frontline builds. So that's why my attributes are set out like this. Normally your frontline stats would be resolve, perception and constitution. So I've gone for a more damage per second type build here, so maximizing might, intellect and dexterity. By far the most important stats for the priests are actually intellect and might. Intellect because almost all of their spells are duration and area of effect. And might, they have a huge amount of healing spells, so that's going to come in handy. And they have quite a lot of damage spells as well. And if you're going to go for a more damage per second build, dexterity is always important. Now this is a bit of a drawback if you want to have your player character as a priest, because a lot of the dialogue skill checks in the game are based on perception, intellect and resolve, and if you're going to have low stats for those, you're not going to be passing or able to pass many of those skill checks. To be honest, they tend to be mainly flavor. You can tend to do things in a different way and still achieve the same result. Also, if you're going to have high might and high dexterity, you will have the occasional skill check or speech check which you'll be able to pass, which you wouldn't have if you went for a more frontline build. Now also, many of the talent picks for the deities actually focus on melee weapons, Skaen included. So Barath, Eophas and Skaen, all their weapon accuracy boosts are for melee weapons. So that is a bit of a drawback if you're not very good at a frontline build. But the way I would recommend to use the priest if you're going to have a more of a melee focus is try to avoid engagement. Let someone else engage the priest, engage the enemy first before you send the priest in. Or in fact, with the Skaen build in particular, use that sneak attack by inflicting afflictions on enemies so they can't attack you back at all, and then send the priest in to attack your opponents. So that's a way you can avoid being targeted and having the priest get killed pretty quickly. Now for my actual culture, I've picked Old Veiler. Intellect is by far the most important stat, so it's a no-brainer really. I've picked Colonist. Now that's arguably a bit of a strange pick. The reason why I've picked that is because food and potions, which this affects, are very good for melee type builds. So if you do get engaged, this is a way you can keep your priest alive slightly longer. Food and potions often give extra endurance, for example, or extra stat boosts or DR. Now the race pick I've chosen is Hearth Orlan. Now this is arguably quite a weird pick. Normally I would pick a race based on the maximized stats, and in fact the Hearth Orlan has pretty terrible stats for the maximized stats. It negates might by 1, which I would rather have more in, and these stats aren't really useful for me either. but it has quite a decent ability. Minor Threat basically does extra crit attacks if your priest attacks someone who's already being targeted by a teammate. Now with area of effect spells, that becomes much more useful. And also if we're going to be using the Skaen priest, we're going to be using weapons like the stiletto and club, which are very frequent attacking weapons, so you get to use that a bit more. Now if I wasn't going to pick the Half Orlan, I would highly consider the Death Godlike. That gives it's the only race type which gives intellect, and also this is very good against low endurance enemies, so you could send the priest in, the Skaen priest in against very weak enemies and take them down quite quickly. The drawback with the Godlikes is for the player character you can't wear a helmet, and helmets are very useful for player characters as it gives stat boosts, and stat boosts are more useful for the player characters because of skill checks and dialogue skill checks. So that's the reason why you may not want a Death Godlike if you're selecting a priest as your player character. Other selections you may consider: Wood Elf gives you an extra point in Dexterity, which is a bit useful. That is a range boost for extra accuracy. The downside with this is that many of the priest spells are quite close range, about 5 meters away, so it only just qualify. It's a bit close, to be honest. Dwarf, boost in might, which is good. Sadly, a minus in dexterity. I prefer the boreal dwarf over the mountain dwarf. This gives an extra accuracy boost against those two types. That tends to be more of a frontline build, so that's only really good if you were trying to make a frontline priest build, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Amawa, very similar, might boost. That's a frontline defensive type skill. Island Amawa could be quite good for the Magran priest build potentially. They specialise in arquebuses, so you could maybe have more arquebuses to fire off at the start of combat. That's potentially a pretty good idea. Humans, I really don't like their ability, and their stats aren't that great for this build either. Skills, talents and abilities. As usual, I'm going to do skills at level 12 just to save time. So moving on, talents. Now the priest actually has quite a few unique talents that are only available to the priest. You can see the mention of Radiance quite a few times here. All of these affect your Holy Radiance per encounter ability, so boost them in one way or another. I'm going to be picking at least some of those later on. My first pick for talents though is going to be Prey on the Weak. This is the deity pick that is specific to picking the Skaen deity. So you can see here we get plus 10 accuracy boost to stilettos and clubs, but more importantly we get a lesser version of the rogue sneak attack ability, which I mentioned earlier on. So if you cause an affliction on an enemy, you get say 1.2 damage boost as long as it's one of the 9 afflictions that qualify. So I'm going to pick Prey on the Weak, and this is really central to this build as well. A lot of my decisions are based around picking this talent. So moving on, level 3 we unlock all of the priest spells for level 2. So this works just the same way as the druid. You get all the spells, you don't have to choose from them like the wizard does. It does mean it's quite daunting to figure out what spell you're going to pick each time, because you have so many options to choose from. But when you start to get to know these spells, it's really useful having them all straight away. I'm going to be covering some of these spells in more detail later on when I do a bit of combat. So moving on to the next level, level 4. Get to pick another talent here. So let's mention Interdiction. This is a per encounter ability. It causes a dazed effect. There's actually a spell that you can basically daze opponents with, so I'm a bit on the fence of Interdiction. It's a huge radius for it, and it's actually a couple of talents that basically picking Interdiction unlocks talents that further boost Interdiction. There's one which increases the accuracy, the likelihood that Interdiction hits in the first place, and the other one adds a extra weakened affliction ability to the Interdiction. Now weakened is actually one of the afflictions that unlocks the lesser sneak attack ability, one of the 9 afflictions, so that could definitely be a good combination, firing off Interdiction and then attacking with whatever weapon or spell you decide to use with the Skaen priest. So I'm on the fence of interdiction. Now, Untroubled Faith is only available to priests that are a player character. Basically, it negates any of the negative effects from disfavorable reputations that you may have gotten. So in Skaen's instance, I believe that's aggressive or benevolent reputations. I don't really like this talent at all. Really, what you should be doing is just avoiding getting those reputations in the first place. This is kind of a get out of jail card, a waste of a talent really. So I would not recommend doing that, picking this at all. At this level as well, we also start to get bonus spells. So at this level we can only have the bonus first level spells. This works in basically exactly the same way as the druid and the wizard. They also get these too. So I think at this stage I'm going to pick Brilliant Radiance. Now what this does is basically add burn damage onto the existing amount of your Holy Radiance ability, but also it affects non-vessels, non-undead type creatures. So it isn't a huge amount of damage, but because the Holy Radiance's area of effect is so large, you can get quite a few enemies under that and maybe do some damage to them and maybe wipe out the odd low endurance enemy, definitely. And against vessels is even better, basically. So that's what I'm going to pick here. Moving on. More spells. So this is level 3 spells at level 5. And next talent, so we can have a bonus second spell if we wish at this stage. I'm actually going to pick a weapon focus here, Ruffian. So you can see here that Saber and Stiletto are in the same group, so that works out really well. And as I mentioned earlier, all the other deities are spread out over 2 groups. So say for Magran, for example, the arquebus is in soldier and the sword is in knight. So it doesn't really work so well, these weapon focuses, for the other deities. And I think Rod is... where is Rod here? Rod is in noble, and the quarterstaff is in peasant for whale, and they're all similar to that for the other deities. So I think some weapon focuses might be worthwhile picking for other deities, but for Skaen this is very much good. You can also have a sidearm, a pistol or a blunderbuss, which works really well with this build. You're not always wanting to get into melee with this priest. There are going to be enemies that have high DR or are very likely to engage you if you go anywhere near them, and you really don't want to be receiving attacks with this priest. It's definitely prey on the weak, scavenge melee guy really. So yeah, let's pick Ruffian here. And moving on, so at level 7 we unlock all of the level 4 spells. And to be honest, at this stage I've kind of picked all of the key talents, so it's kind of well, you should really pick what you really like here. One talent I would quite recommend potentially for a priest is Sign of Flame. The priest actually has quite a lot of flame type spells. Holy Radiance does burn damage, and there's at least, I think there's at least 4 or 5 other spells that cause flame damage that the priest has access to. The priest does have other spells that cause different types of elemental damage, but nowhere near as much in frequency as flame, so this is the one I would recommend more than, say, Heart of the Storm, for example, or Spirit of Decay. I'm not sure if they have any corrode damage actually. You could also give yourself flame weapons with Scion of the Flame as well. I think Deep Pockets might be quite a decent pick for a priest, especially if you're going to have a lot of lore or survival. It's probably not the best of picks, but it's something you may want to consider. Defensive, there isn't really many good ones here, to be honest. If you are trying to make a more of a frontline priest build, then you're always going to want to pick Cautious Attack and Weapon and Shield style for a frontline build in main. Superior Deflection would be good for that as well, and maybe even Hold the Line. offensive picks. I quite like Bloody Slaughter actually for a Priestess Skaen. This does yet more hits converted to crits, but this works against low endurance opponents. I think it counts as under half endurance, not 25% like the Death God. Like, I'm not 100% sure on that though. It's an extra half to crit damage multiplier against targets with low endurance. So yeah, you definitely would want to be attacking low endurance opponents in melee with this Skaen Priest if you pick that. I think there's vulnerable attack, which is very good for not very damaging weapons, not very high damage amounts, so it does lower the speed though. But that's something I consider if you want to get this guy melee often. Also 2-weapon style as well, works reasonably well with that. There's probably a pick here somewhere that I should probably mention, but I can't think of it at the moment. So we could improve our Irradiance abilities. This one actually quite works well for a melee type character, so it might not be too bad for the Skaen Priest. Although, yeah, it gives a boost to all of your stats actually, and move speed, but it lowers your healing amount from the Holy Radiance ability, so it does have a drawback. That gives you extra accuracy for other people within your party, so I quite like that one actually. So yeah, it's really a case of what you like here the most, so I'd probably pick that one, I think. And moving on. At level 9, the level 1 spells for the priests actually become per encounter spells, so you can use them as much as you want in combat, up to 4 times. There is, at this stage, it may actually become worthwhile to think about picking this, because you could have then 5 per encounter spells for your level 1 spells. So that really goes up in value here. And likewise at level 11 your second level spells also become per encounter abilities. So I definitely consider that for a level 12 talent pick. But instead of picking those, let's max out our melee, I think, with this build here. I definitely consider doing that, though I'm not sure how valuable they are, though, to be honest. Bloody Slaughter, let's go for. And that's our 6th level spells at level 11. And we should spend our skills, so I'm going to max out survival here. So this basically increases the duration of our food and our potions, and they're mainly defensive in nature, so giving you extra DR or endurance, for example. So if someone did engage the priest in combat, we could use one of those potions to basically make us survive a bit longer before someone helps us out, or we kill the opponent that was attacking the priest. So I think lower that to 12. I'll invest some in athletics and a point in stealth. Stealth, it could be potentially useful for a priest build. The priest build does have a lot of trap type spells, so if you want to get quite close to an enemy, having extra stealth before you lay that trap would be quite helpful. You probably want to have athletics 3 for most of the characters, just so you hit the cap on the combat fatigue amount. Can't get better than 90%. I think for most priests though, you would probably want to invest in lore, more offensive, especially priests that you don't intend on getting into melee or putting at risk of being engaged by anyone in melee, like the Skaen Priest. So yeah, that's the skills I would probably recommend for this build. Last talent, let's pick another one here, is it? So 2-weapon style could go for. Maybe vulnerable attack. But we're going to be doing a lot of crits anyway, so maybe we don't need it so much. Not sure. Let's go for 2-weapon style. Okay, let's take a look at some of the spells and a tiny bit of combat. Okay, so this is our Skaen Priest at level 12. You can see that it has huge amounts of accuracy. I'm using a couple of clubs here, and we've got the accuracy boost from the Prey on the Weak ability and also the Ruffian ability. Damage wise it's not so amazing, but remember that we're going to be doing a lot of extra crits with the Minor Threat ability and the Bloody Slaughter ability. You can see here as well the massive spell list that we have. There's got to be about 50 spells here. Basically at every level you seem to get a prayer against spells, so basically these are a defense against certain affliction types, very useful against certain enemies. So say for example you're up against lions which do fear attacks, you may want to cast that at the start of combat. They also have a healing spell at basically every level as well, so lots of healing spells here. They have some more specialized healing spells as well later on. I should show this Prey on Weak ability here as well. Sadly it doesn't show you how exactly it's triggered from this tooltip screen. You have to load up a rogue sneak attack ability to find out what afflictions cause the lesser sneak attack basically. Let's take a look at some of these spells as well then. So I'm going to pick out the odd spell here and there. I'm not going to go through them all just because there's too many. You can see, actually let's try one out here. So let's use this. This is a fear spell.
Worthy.
You see then it went down to 3 and immediately went back up to 4. That's because at level 9 this becomes per encounter. Now I'll show you a level 3 spell which aren't per encounters at any stage in the game. So let's use a Pillar of the Faith ability. So this is actually a very good spell. Causes crush damage, foe air of effect, prone. Most of the priest spells are area of effect, but not all of them. Can I... Oh, it looks like you actually have to target someone and then it causes an area of effect with that one. I think there's a level 4... This spell actually can do that
beyond seek.
So that was at 4 and it hasn't gone back up because it's not per encounter and never becomes it. So that's a burn spell. As I mentioned earlier, there's quite a few burn spells. There's one at level 2, Divine Mark, the Holy Radiance ability, which is really the key encounter ability with the priest. That's burn damage as well. And you can see there with our extra intellect for this character, that range on that is pretty huge. Yeah. What else is there? There's trap spell here.
Lavaru beyond seek.
Thought I cast it on him then, luckily I didn't. So that does burn damage. There's quite a few traps. There's one here, Repulsing Seal, that does prone. So what else is there? There's Warding Seal, Shock. One ability I really like is Iconic Projection. This does... It's like a very narrow corridor effect over quite a large distance, and this basically does freeze damage, but it also heals up your own guys, so this can be... It's best of both worlds really. You can use this to get out of jail and do damage to opponents at the same time. There aren't many spells which do that. What else is there here? There's Consecrated Ground, so that does healing over a certain area, over a large amount of time. Very useful spell. What else do we have? We have Halt, that can come in handy. Very handy at certain times. Quite like using that against slow moving enemies like trolls and stuff like that. What else do we have? There's that spell here, Prevent Death, very good spell. And the very late spells do a lot of damage. Yet another burn spell here. So let's actually try preset in combat a bit. I'm going to take on a couple of wolves up here. Now we're massively over leveled.
Let's check by those outcroppings.
Just to show off.
What you need?
I'm going to show off the lesser sneak attack here, I think. Okay. Right, so she's getting sighted. About to. Right, so I'm not going to attack with her. Let's bring this guy around the back.
Yeah?
Right, I need to attack her to get flanked on. And flanked is one of the affliction types that trigger the lesser sneak attack ability. So you can see here that we attacked, got a crit, and extra 1.2 damage for having lesser sneak. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you don't actually need to necessarily use a club or a stiletto to trigger that. You can use any spell or weapon as long as you've got one of the right affliction types. So this guy, we've stuck him for 14.5 seconds. So this is one of the afflictions that you can trigger the lesser sneak attack ability with. So let's use our pistol here.
Beyond seek.
Attack him. And you can see there, lesser sneak attack triggered, and we did a lot of damage to take that guy down. With the Holy Radiance ability, I picked a talent that does burn damage on non-vessels, so I used that. And that did... well, it healed up our companion, Kalisha, and it also did 15 burn damage as well. Now, I could go through all of these to show you what they do, but I'd be making this video for the next half an hour or an hour longer, so I think I'm going to call it an end of the video at this point. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you have, please consider giving this video a like. I'm really grateful to those of you who do, as it improves my videos in YouTube's search rankings, which is really important to attract new people to the channel so they can actually find out about my videos. If you're actually new to the channel yourself, you may want to consider subscribing. There's plenty more of these min-max character creation videos for Pillars of Eternity. I've covered nearly every class now. I think there's about 3 left at the time I'm recording this video to do. Rogue, Druid and Ranger, but I'm going to cover those at some point. I'm actually going to start to do some more builds for classes I've already covered as well in the future. So if there's a certain class you want to see sooner rather than later, or a certain build, please let me know. If you have any feedback about the priest class or this build as well, please use the comment section. I reply to pretty much every comment or question, especially left on the channel. Also, you may want to check out my Patreon page. That's a way you could potentially support the channel or have more say about the content I put on the channel as well, if you're interested in that. Right, I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to cover, so thanks for watching again, and I'll see you next time.